with armies across deserts and frozen frontiers, was now failing. Julia had lived her life with agency. She had crossed from Syria to Rome by choice. She had embraced political power deliberately. She had remained in the palace after her son murdered his brother. She had governed during campaigns. She had curated an intellectual revival in an age of suspicion. She would not let her final chapter be written by someone else. In the year 217 in Antioch, she chose to end her life. Some sources suggest she refused food. Others imply a more direct method. The details are uncertain. The intention is not. Her death was not theatrical. It was controlled. It was consistent with the Roman ideal of dignitas, the preservation of personal honor, even in defeat. In a world where emperors were often butchered by their own guards, Julia chose something quieter. Macrinus allowed her body to be returned to Rome. Eventually, her remains were placed in the mausoleum of Hadrian alongside members of the Sever family. Even her enemies understood her stature. But history did not close immediately around her legacy. In the East, her sister Julia Mzur would soon rally support for her grandson, a teenage priest of Elagabal from Amazu. Within a year, Macrinus would be overthrown. The Severan bloodline would briefly reclaim the throne through Elagabalus and later Severus Alexander. Even in death, Julia's network endured. She had entered Rome as a provincial bride guided by prophecy. She left as one of the most intellectually formidable empresses in imperial history, a woman who had navigated civil war, fratricide, tyranny, and political collapse without surrendering her composure. Her body failed, her dynasty fractured, but her will remained unmistakably her own. After her death, Rome did not immediately recognize what it had lost. Julia Donner had never ruled in her own name, never commanded legions directly, never officially signed laws as sovereign. Yet for decades, she had been the connective tissue of an empire stretched thin by ambition and violence. Without her steady presence, the intellectual and administrative coherence she cultivated began to fade. Her sister Julia Mesa would soon maneuver her grandson, the future Elagabalus, onto the throne, restoring Severan blood to power. But that restoration was unstable, theatrical, and controversial. The philosophical seriousness that had marked Julia's salon did not return with the same force. The empire would increasingly tilt towards spectacle and instability. What made Julia unique was not simply her survival in a brutal political world. It was her ability to combine power with intellect. In her court gathered jurists who refined Roman law in ways that would influence legal systems for centuries. Philosophers debated ethics and governance under her patronage. Writers shaped narratives that attempted to reconcile imperial authority with moral order. In an age drifting toward militarized rule, she insisted that ideas still mattered. That insistence was rare. Roman imperial history is filled with strong women. Agrena, Livia, Messalina, often remembered for manipulation or scandal. Julia Domer's reputation, by contrast, rests on something quieter, but arguably more profound. Intellectual leadership. She bridged worlds. Born in Syria, educated in Greek thought, ruling in Rome, she embodied the empire's diversity at its height. Her very presence challenged the idea that Rome belonged only to Italy. Under the Severs, the empire became visibly global. Julia was at the center of that transformation. Yet her life was also a study in cost. She lost one son to murder in her own chambers. She watched another descend into paranoia and violence. She endured civil war, political suspicion, and physical illness. She navigated male-dominated structures without ever publicly rebelling against them, instead mastering them from within. In the end, her salon truly became one of the last great gatherings of classical Roman intellect before the 3rd century crisis deepened and the empire structure began to fracture more permanently. Julia Donner did not save Rome forever, but for a generation through strategy, composure, and thought, she held its fragile world together and proved that power guided by intellect could still shape history. Before martial arts had names, they had bruises. Long before de jus, Temples or training halls echoed with ritual bows. Human beings were learning how to survive with their hands. The earliest forms of combat were not systems. They were instincts sharpened by fear. A strike to the throat, a grip on the wrist, a shove to the ground. These were not techniques written in manuals. They were discoveries made in chaos. But as small tribes became organized societies, something subtle began to change. Fighting was no longer only about individual survival. It became collective. Armies formed. Borders emerged. Authority needed protection, and raw aggression was no longer enough. Efficiency mattered. A wild swing was Tess energy. A controlled strike conserves it. Ancient civilizations quickly realized that combat could be refined. Movements could be practiced repeatedly. Balance could be improved. Strength could be directed instead of scattered. Over time, what began as instinct evolved into structure. In early India, warriors trained not only in weapon use but in disciplined body control. In ancient China, soldiers drilled formations and techniques that demanded coordination and breath control. In Greece, athletic training merged seamlessly with combat practice, blurring the line between sport and war. Across cultures separated by geography and language, one idea kept resurfacing. Skill in combat could be cultivated deliberately. But here is the deeper transformation. At some point, fighting stopped being only physical. It became moral, spiritual, philosophical. Warriors began to believe that discipline of the body required discipline of the mind. Strength without control was dangerous. Power without restraint threatened order. So combat training became ritualized. Teachers passed down not just movements but codes of conduct. Courage, honor, self-mastery. The battlefield had shaped the body. Now society was shaping the warrior. What we now call martial arts did not appear fully formed. They grew slowly from necessity into tradition, from tradition into identity, and from identity into philosophy. Across early civilizations, combat stopped being simply about defeating an opponent. It became a way to defeat oneself. Fear, anger, hesitation before facing anyone else. That transformation would define martial arts for centuries to come. If we trace the earliest structured martial traditions, one of the oldest surviving systems leads us to southern India to a discipline known as Kalari Payat. Developed in the region of Kerala, Kalaripayattu was more than a method of fighting. It was a complete training system that blended combat, medicine, spirituality, and physical mastery into one unified practice. The training hall known as the Kalari was treated as sacred ground. Students entered barefoot. They saluted the earth. They honored their teacher. This was not casual sparring. It was ritual. Legends connect Kalari Payattu to ancient warrior clans and even to mythic heroes. Some traditions claim that the sage Parasurama, an avatar of Vishnu, created the art to train warriors after reclaiming the land from the sea. Whether myth or memory, the message is clear. Combat was woven into cosmic order. Explosive leaps like a lion. These postures were not decorative. They built coordination and adaptability. Only after mastering the body did students advance to weapons. Wooden sticks came first, then metal blades, spears, and shields. Each weapon required precision and timing. A single mistake could be fatal. The discipline demanded calm under pressure. But Kalaripayattu contained something even more unique. Knowledge of vital points. Ancient Indian texts described mama points, sensitive areas of the body. Training began with body conditioning. Students learned flexibility, balance, and controlled breathing before ever touching a weapon. Their movements were animal-inspired, low stances like a tiger, coiled readiness like a serpent, where strikes could disable or kill. These same points were used in healing practices within Ayurveda. The warrior therefore learned both how to harm and how to heal. Violence and restoration existed side by side. This duality shaped the philosophy of Indian martial practice. Combat was powerful, but it required restraint. A true warrior was not reckless. He was controlled. Over time, India's martial traditions influenced neighboring regions. Trade routes carried not only spices and textiles, but ideas. Some historians even suggest that elements of Indian combat systems traveled eastward toward China through monks and merchants. Whether directly connected or independently evolved, one truth stands firm. In ancient India, martial training became something greater than battlefield preparation. It became discipline, devotion, and a sacred art of the body. If India refined combat into sacred discipline, China transformed it into a living philosophy. The origins of what we now call Kung Fu are layered in legend and history. Some traditions speak of an Indian monk named Bodhharma who traveled to China and arrived at the Shaolin Temple during the 6th century. According to later stories, he found the monks physically weak from long hours of meditation and introduced exercises to strengthen their bodies. Whether this account is literal or symbolic, it captures something essential. In China, martial training fused with spiritual cultivation. At the Shaolin Temple, combat techniques were practiced alongside Buddhist meditation. Movement and stillness were not opposites. They were partners. A punch required focus. A block required breath control. Discipline of the body supported discipline of the mind. But Kung Fu did not begin only in monasteries. Long before Shaolin rose to prominence, Chinese soldiers trained in organized combat systems. Ancient military manuals described spear formations, archery drills, and unarmed techniques. During the Warring States period, combat skill was not optional. It was survival in an era of constant conflict. Over time, these battlefield methods evolved. Techniques were refined into forms, choreographed sequences of movement that preserved strategy and timing. These forms allowed knowledge to be passed down even in peaceful periods. A student could rehearse combat without actual war. Philosophy shaped the art deeply. Taoist principles influenced fluid, circular movements that emphasized yielding rather than resisting. Confucian ideals stressed hierarchy and respect between master and student. Buddhism introduced self-control and detachment from ego. This blend created something distinct. Kung Fu was not simply about overpowering an opponent. It was about harmony, redirecting force instead of meeting it heat, controlling anger instead of being consumed by it. Weapons training remained central. Staffs, swords, spears, and hook blades demanded precision and grace. But even unarmed practice required discipline equal to armed combat. Every strike carried intention. Every stance grounded the practitioner. As centuries passed, regional styles emerged. Northern systems emphasized wide, extended movements. Southern styles favored compact power. Each reflected geography, culture, and local needs. Yet at its core, Chinese martial tradition carried one consistent message. Strength must be balanced by wisdom. In the training hall, as in life, mastery began within. While monks trained in temples and warriors drilled in sacred courtyards, ancient Greece approached combat from another angle, the arena. The Greeks did not separate athletics from warfare. To them, a strong body was a civic virtue. A disciplined fighter was a valuable citizen. Physical excellence was not vanity. It was preparation. Among the most brutal and revered combat disciplines of the ancient world was pankration. Its name literally meant all power. Introduced into the Olympic Games in 648 BC, pankration blended wrestling and boxing into a near unrestricted contest. Strikes, joint locks, chokes, throws, almost anything was allowed. There were few rules, no weight classes, no time limits. Victory came through submission or unconsciousness. But pankration was not chaos. It demanded technique. Fighters trained to control balance, conserve energy, and exploit weakness. A poorly timed attack could leave you exposed. A moment of hesitation could cost you consciousness. Greek city-states valued this discipline because it mirrored warfare. Hoplites fought in close quarters with shields and spears. But once formations broke, combat turned personal. Grappling skill and endurance mattered. Yet there was also philosophy in Greek combat culture. The concept of erit, excellence in mind and body, shaped athletic training. The gymnasium was not merely a workout space. It was a place of education. Young men trained physically while also studying rhetoric and philosophy. Strength and intellect were cultivated together. Even Plato wrote about the importance of balancing gymnastics and music, meaning physical training and intellectual refinement. Too much aggression without education created brutality. Too much study without strength created weakness. Pancration embodied this balance. It was savage, but it was also structured. Competitors were admired not only for victory, but for endurance and courage. To stand your ground in the arena was proof of character. Greek martial practice did not carry the overt spirituality of India or China. Instead, it was civic, public, celebrated. Combat was spectacle, but it was also preparation. In Greece, fighting became a test of identity. Not just whether you could defeat your opponent, but whether you could master yourself under pressure in front of an entire city watching. The body became a stage for discipline, and the arena became a school for warriors. If Greece turned combat into public spectacle, Rome turned it into machinery. The Roman Empire did not romanticize fighting. It systematized it. For Rome, combat was not about individual glory. It was about efficiency, coordination, and relentless discipline. The legion was not a gathering of heroes. It was a living engine of war. Training in the Roman army was constant and unforgiving. Recruits drilled daily with wooden swords heavier than real ones. Shields were oversized in practice to build endurance. Marches stretched for miles under full equipment. Soldiers learned to thrust, not slash. A stab was quicker, more lethal, less likely to expose the body. Every movement had purpose. Unlike the philosophical blending of body and spirit seen in India or China, Roman martial culture emphasized order above all. A soldier's strength meant nothing if he broke formation. Individual skill was secondary to collective cohesion. The Tudo formation, where shields locked overhead and in front turned men into a single armored creature. This was combat as engineering. Yet even Rome absorbed older traditions. Gladiatorial schools trained fighters in specialized techniques drawn from various cultures. Thracian, Samnite, Gaulish. Though gladiators fought for spectacle, their methods were technical and precise. Weapon pairing, footwork, and psychological intimidation all mattered. Outside the arena, Roman military manuals documented training methods. Discipline was enforced with harsh penalties. Cowardice was punished severely. Loyalty was non-negotiable. But something deeper existed beneath this rigidity. The Roman concept of virtues, manly courage, and moral strength shaped military identity. A soldier was expected not only to fight well, but to embody honor and endurance. Combat was proof of character. As the empire expanded, Roman martial systems spread across Europe and the Mediterranean. Local populations adopted Roman drilling techniques. Fortifications and training camps standardized warfare across vast territories. In Rome, martial discipline became the backbone of empire. It was not mystical. It was practical, but it carried a powerful cultural message. Order conquers chaos. And that idea would influence Western combat traditions for centuries. From legion drills to gladiatorial schools, Rome demonstrated that fighting could be industrialized, refined, and exported. The sword was no longer just a weapon. It was a tool of empire. While Rome perfected formation warfare and China refined fluid philosophy, Japan developed something that fused combat with an unshakable code of honor. Early Japanese martial traditions grew out of battlefield necessity. During the Han and Kamakura periods, mounted archers dominated warfare. The samurai emerged not as mythical swordsmen at first, but as skilled cavalry warriors trained in archery, spear combat, and tactical coordination. But as warfare evolved, so did their training. By the medieval period, swordsmanship, kujutsu, became central. Schools formed around specific techniques. Masters passed down lineages of knowledge. Each movement was precise, efficient, and deadly. A single strike was meant to end a fight. Yet, Japanese martial development did not stop at battlefield utility. Zen Buddhism deeply influenced samurai training. Meditation sharpened awareness. The concept of mushin or no-mind taught warriors to act without hesitation or emotional interference. Overthinking meant death. Clarity meant survival. This blending of combat and spirituality gave rise to something distinct. Bushido, the way of the warrior. It emphasized loyalty, discipline, self-control, and acceptance of death. The samurai trained not only to win, but to die honorably if necessary. Training halls were austere. Practice was repetitive. A cut was performed thousands of times until it became instinctive. Sparring was controlled but intense. Wooden swords, then sharpened steel. Precision was sacred. Other arts emerged alongside swordsmanship. Jiu-jitsu developed as a grappling system designed for situations where armor made striking ineffective. Joint locks, throws, and chokes allowed a warrior to neutralize an opponent even without a weapon. Later, these techniques would influence modern judo and other grappling arts. Japanese martial culture placed immense value on discipline. Rank was earned through dedication. Technique was inseparable from character. By the time relative peace settled during the Tokugawa period, martial arts transformed further. Without constant warfare, training shifted from survival toward refinement and self-improvement. Combat became a path of personal cultivation. In Japan, fighting evolved into a lifelong study of precision and restraint. The blade was sharp, but the mind had to be sharper. While Asia and Europe developed codified martial traditions, the civilizations of Mesoamerica shaped combat into something deeply ritualistic. Among the Maya and later the Aztecs, warfare was not only about territorial expansion, it was spiritual obligation. Victory fed the gods. Captives sustained cosmic balance. Combat, therefore, carried sacred weight. Aztec warriors trained from youth in Karmak and Telpak Kali schools. Young boys learned discipline, endurance, and weapon use. The Mekua whittle, a wooden club embedded with razor-sharp obsidian blades, became one of their most feared weapons. Spears, atolls, and shields completed the arsenal. But unlike Roman or Greek systems that prioritized killing efficiency, Mesoamerican combat often emphasized capture. Warriors gained prestige not simply by defeating enemies, but by taking them alive. Captives were destined for ritual sacrifice. This changed technique dramatically. Strikes were aimed to disable rather than instantly kill. Grappling and coordination mattered as much as raw force. The so-called flower wars between city-states were sometimes prearranged conflicts designed to secure prisoners for religious ceremonies. To modernize, this may seem brutal, but 1 hour, 23 minutes, and 55 seconds. Within their worldview, it was structured necessity. The sun required nourishment. The cosmos required blood. Warrior societies formed elite ranks. Eagle and jaguar warriors wore elaborate costumes symbolizing power and divine connection. Advancement came through courage and success in battle. Combat skill was directly tied to social mobility. Physical training was rigorous. Marches, weapon drills, and endurance exercises hardened young recruits. Discipline was enforced strictly. Cowardice could result in severe punishment. Yet, spirituality infused everything. Warriors prayed before battle. They invoked deities associated with war and sacrifice. Combat was not random violence. It was part of cosmic order. In this sense, Mesoamerican martial culture mirrored patterns seen elsewhere. Fighting became ritual. It shaped identity. It reinforced hierarchy. It connected the physical world with the spiritual one. Across continents, civilizations independently reached similar conclusions. Combat was never just about defeating another human being. It was about meaning. In Mesoamerica, that meaning was carved in obsidian and sealed in ceremony. A reminder that martial tradition could bind an entire society to its gods. As centuries passed and empires rose and fell, something remarkable happened across multiple cultures at once. Combat began to leave the battlefield. Periods of relative peace forced martial traditions to adapt. Warriors who once trained for constant war now found themselves without campaigns. Yet the techniques did not disappear. They evolved. In China, during more stable dynasties, martial systems became increasingly tied to internal cultivation. Practices like Tai Chi emerged, emphasizing slow, controlled movements rooted in balance and breath. What once may have had direct combat application transformed into a path of health, longevity, and mental clarity. In Japan, the shift from kenjutsu, practical sword combat, to kendo, the way of the sword, marked a similar transformation. The suffix "du" meant path. It signaled that martial practice was no longer solely about defeating an opponent. It was about self-perfection. In India, warrior traditions that once prepared fighters for regional conflicts were preserved within training lineages, temple schools, and cultural festivals. Techniques remained, but their meaning expanded beyond war. Even in the West, medieval European combat schools that trained knights for armored duels later became structured fencing systems emphasizing form, timing, and sportsmanship. The body still moved with intention, but the goals shifted inward. Martial training became a means of shaping character. Discipline built resilience. Repetition cultivated patience. Sparring taught humility. Students vowed not to glorify violence, but to acknowledge responsibility. The paradox deepened. The better one became at fighting, the less one sought to use it recklessly. Philosophies across cultures reinforced this idea. Taoist thought encouraged harmony over aggression. Zen emphasized clarity without attachment. Bushido demanded moral restraint. Even Western chivalry codes insisted on honor in combat. Across continents, martial arts began carrying similar messages. Strength must be governed by wisdom. Power must serve order, not ego. What began as raw survival had matured into ritualized self-discipline. The battlefield forged the techniques. Peace refined them into philosophy. By this stage, martial arts were no longer simply preparation for war. They were systems of personal development. Schools, lineages, and codes ensured continuity. Combat had become culture, and culture would carry it into the modern world. By the time the modern era dawned, martial arts had already traveled far beyond their original landscapes. Trade routes, migration, conquest, and cultural exchange carried techniques across continents. Ideas blended, styles adapted. What began as regionally distinct traditions slowly became global languages of movement. When Okinawan practitioners developed karate under the influence of Chinese systems, they preserved both striking techniques and philosophical discipline. When Japanese jiu-jitsu evolved into judo under Jigorano, combat efficiency was reshaped into structured sport and moral education. The emphasis shifted from battlefield survival to character formation. In China, martial traditions endured political upheaval and modernization. Some schools emphasized performance and cultural preservation. Others maintained combat practicality. Yet, even when adapted for demonstration or sport, the underlying principles remained rooted in centuries-old philosophy. Western societies, too, reinterpreted their combat traditions. Boxing, wrestling, and fencing became organized sports with formal rules and competitions. Though stripped of lethal intent, they retained the core values of discipline, endurance, and respect. In the 20th century, global exposure accelerated. Soldiers stationed abroad brought techniques home. Teachers immigrated. Films and demonstrations captured imaginations. Martial arts became not only methods of self-defense, but symbols of identity and resilience. Yet beneath the globalization and commercialization, the ancient pattern remained intact. Every culture that developed martial systems had faced the same challenge: how to control violence without being consumed by it, how to train the body without neglecting the mind, how to cultivate strength while preserving restraint. The answers varied in style, but not in spirit. From the Kalari training halls of India to the Shaolin courtyards of China, from the Greek arena to the Roman legion camp, from samurai dojos to Mesoamerican warrior schools, one theme endured. Combat was never purely physical. It was ritual. It was discipline. It was worldview. Martial arts survived because they evolved. They shifted from survival tools to philosophical paths. They became vehicles for teaching courage, patience, humility, and self-mastery. What began as instinct in the earliest human conflicts became one of humanity's most refined cultural expressions. Not because people loved violence, but because they sought to understand it and, ultimately, to rise above it. In ancient Egypt, cosmetics were not optional. They were essential. Long before modern beauty industries, Egyptians had already transformed daily grooming into a ritual that blended aesthetics, medicine, and spirituality. The most iconic symbol of this tradition was kohl, the dark eyeliner that framed the eyes of both men and women across social classes. From pharaohs to laborers, kohl was part of everyday life. But this was not simple decoration. The Egyptian world was filled with unseen forces. Illness, misfortune, and spiritual attack were believed to travel invisibly through the air. The eyes, seen as powerful yet vulnerable, required protection. Lining them with black or green pigment was thought to guard against the evil eye and invoke divine protection from gods such as Horus. The elongated almond shape depicted in tomb paintings was both fashion and faith. The ingredients themselves tell a deeper story. Kohl was often made from ground galena, a lead-based mineral, or from malachite, a green copper ore, mixed with animal fat or plant oils. The powder was applied with carefully carved sticks of wood, bone, or ivory. These tools were stored in decorative containers, some shaped like small statues or engraved with religious symbols. Cosmetics also served practical functions. The intense Egyptian sun reflected harshly off sand and stone. The dark pigment around the eyes reduced glare, much like modern athletes use eye black today. Some chemical compounds in the makeup may have even stimulated the immune system or helped prevent eye infections in a region where dust and insects were constant threats. Skin care mattered just as much as eye makeup. Oils made from morena, sesame, or castor were used to moisturize the skin. Perfumed unguents blended animal fats with aromatic resins such as myrrh and frankincense. During banquets, wealthy guests wore cones of scented wax atop their wigs. As the wax melted in the heat, fragrance slowly flowed over their hair and shoulders. Class distinctions were visible in materials. The wealthy used finely ground minerals and elaborate containers. The poor relied on simpler mixtures. Yet the act itself, the ritual of application, was shared across society. In Egypt, beauty was not superficial. It was protection. It was health. It was identity. And in a land where eternity mattered more than youth, cosmetics were carefully packed into tombs, ready for use in the afterlife. While Egypt perfected dramatic eyeliner and perfumed rituals along the Nile, another civilization was experimenting with beauty between the rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates. In ancient Mesopotamia, home to Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, cosmetics were closely tied to status and urban identity. These were some of the earliest city builders in human history. With cities came visibility. With visibility came appearance. Archaeological discoveries reveal small cosmetic containers, carved applicators, and pigment traces dating back thousands of years. Both men and women enhanced their eyes, with dark pigments similar to kohl. The eyes were again central, expressive, symbolic, and powerful. But Mesopotamian beauty extended beyond eyeliner. Elite women colored their lips and cheeks using crushed gemstones and mineral-based pigments. Red tones were particularly valued. They signaled vitality and desirability. The ingredients were sometimes expensive and imported, which meant cosmetics quickly became a marker of wealth. Hair also carried deep cultural meaning. Thick, dark hair was admired. Oils were applied to give shine and manageability in the hot climate. Elaborate braids and curled styles were common among the upper classes. Men, particularly rulers and priests, cultivated carefully groomed beards, often curled into symmetrical patterns. Grooming was not vanity. It reflected order, power, and civilization. Fragrance played a major role in Mesopotamian life. Perfume making developed early in the region. Aromatic plants were distilled or infused into oils. Records suggest that skilled perfumers worked within temple complexes, blending scents for both ritual and personal use. Smell, like sight, carried spiritual weight. Pleasant fragrance was associated with divine favor. Beauty was also tied to law and morality. Ancient legal codes mention appearance indirectly, particularly in cases of adultery, marriage contracts, and social conduct. Presentation could influence reputation. Reputation influenced survival in tightly structured city-states. Yet, just as in Egypt, cosmetics were not purely aesthetic. The harsh climate demanded skin protection. Oils prevented cracking and dryness. Pigments may have provided mild shielding from sunlight. Mesopotamia demonstrates something crucial about ancient cosmetics. Beauty evolved wherever urban life intensified. As societies grew more complex, so did the language of appearance. Cosmetics became tools of identity. They communicated class, devotion, and social standing in crowded streets and temple courts. Long before mirrors of polished bronze reflected painted faces, beauty was already shaping civilization itself. As civilizations matured around the Mediterranean, ancient Greece introduced a different philosophy of beauty, one that prized balance, moderation, and the illusion of effortlessness. Unlike the bold eyeliner of Egypt or the gemstone pigments of Mesopotamia, Greek cosmetics often aimed to enhance rather than transform. The Greek ideal celebrated harmony of proportions. Beauty was seen as a reflection of inner virtue. To appear excessive or overly adorned could suggest vanity or moral weakness. Yet this did not mean Greeks avoided cosmetics. Women, especially among the upper classes, lightened their skin deliberately. Pale skins signaled status. It meant you did not labor outdoors. White lead and chalk-based powders were applied to the face to create a luminous complexion. Unfortunately, these substances were toxic, a reminder that beauty has always carried risk. To add color, women used crushed berries or red ochre to tint lips and cheeks. The effect was meant to look subtle, almost accidental. A healthy flush suggested youth and vitality, qualities highly valued in marriage markets. Eyes were also defined, though less dramatically than in Egypt. Soot and charcoal were used sparingly to darken lashes or brows. Eyebrows themselves were carefully shaped. In some cases, a unibrow was considered attractive, symbolizing intelligence and purity. When nature did not cooperate, cosmetic tricks filled the gap. Hair was another central feature. Golden or light hair was admired, partly influenced by mythological depictions of gods and heroes. Some women used plant-based lightening agents to achieve a brighter tone. Hairstyles were intricate, often braided and pinned, reflecting both fashion and social role. Perfume carried cultural weight as well. Greek society valued fragrance as a sign of refinement. Oils infused with herbs, flowers, and resins were applied after bathing. However, philosophers sometimes criticized excessive scent as indulgent. Even beauty had to remain within reason. This tension between adornment and moderation defined Greek cosmetic culture. Beauty was expected, but restraint was admired. What stands out most is the connection between aesthetics and ethics. For the Greeks, the body was a canvas of character. To care for one's appearance was acceptable, even expected, but it had to align with the broader ideal of balance. Cosmetics in Greece were not bold statements. They were careful whispers, subtle adjustments meant to reflect harmony, youth, and controlled elegance in a society obsessed with proportion. If the Greeks preferred subtlety, the Romans embraced transformation. Ancient Rome inherited cosmetic traditions from both Greece and Egypt, but amplified them. As the empire expanded, luxury goods flowed into the city from across the Mediterranean and beyond. With wealth came extravagance, and cosmetics became more elaborate, more visible, and more controversial. Roman women of the upper classes invested significant time in daily beauty routines. Pale skin remained fashionable, signaling leisure and status. White lead and chalk powders were applied generously to create a porcelain-like complexion. The irony, of course, was that prolonged use damaged the skin, sometimes causing discoloration or illness, which then required even more cosmetic correction. Rouge made from red ochre or crushed mulberries added color to cheeks. Lips were tinted using plant dyes or mineral pigments. Eyes were darkened with soot or imported coal. Eyebrows were shaped carefully and in some cases enhanced artificially. But Roman cosmetics were not limited to the face. Skin creams and lotions were widely used. Recipes survive in ancient texts describing mixtures of honey, milk, animal fat, barley flour, and even crocodile dung. These were believed to soften skin, remove blemishes, or reduce wrinkles. Beauty was not just decorative, it was maintenance. Perfume became a full industry in Rome. Fragrances were imported from Arabia, Egypt, and India. Oils scented with rose, myrrh, cinnamon, and saffron were stored in delicate glass containers. A wealthy Roman might apply scent to hair, skin, clothing, and even furniture. Excess was common. Yet, Roman society held a complicated attitude toward cosmetics. Moralists like Seneca and Juvenal criticized women who wore heavy makeup, suggesting it hid true character. Excessive adornment was often associated with vanity or moral decay. At the same time, public expectation demanded polished appearance. A woman of status was expected to look refined. Cosmetics, therefore, became a performance of class. Wealthy women had personal attendants, cosmeti, who applied products, styled hair, and prepared elaborate looks. Enslaved workers often specialized in these tasks. In Rome, beauty was both personal and political. To appear well-groomed signaled power, discipline, and prosperity. To appear neglected suggested decline. As the empire grew more complex, cosmetics mirrored its contradictions. Luxury and decay, elegance and excess, admiration and criticism. In Roman society, beauty was no longer quiet. It was spectacle. While Rome turned cosmetics into spectacle, ancient China shaped them into symbolism. Beauty in early Chinese dynasties was deeply connected to cultural ideals of harmony, refinement, and social order. Appearance was not simply personal preference. It reflected one's place within the broader moral and cosmic structure. Pale skin once again signaled status. In agrarian societies, darker skin implied labor under the sun. Aristocratic women used rice powder and finely ground minerals to lighten the face. The goal was smoothness and delicacy, skin like porcelain. During the Tang Dynasty in particular, cosmetics reached striking levels of creativity. Women applied vibrant rouge high on the cheeks, sometimes blending into the temples. Lips were painted in carefully shaped patterns, small petal-like forms rather than fully colored mouths. Eyebrows were drawn thin, arched, or even shaped into unusual curves depending on fashion trends. One distinctive practice was the application of huadian, small decorative marks, placed on the forehead. These could be made of gold leaf, colored paper, or pigment shaped into flowers or abstract symbols. They were delicate yet intentional, adding visual rhythm to the face. But Chinese cosmetics carried layers of meaning. Confucian values emphasized modesty and propriety, especially for women of noble households. While beauty was appreciated, it had to align with virtue. Excessive adornment could be interpreted as moral weakness. Therefore, refinement and balance were key. Fragrance also played a central role. Incense culture flourished in imperial courts. Hair was perfumed, garments were scented, and rooms were filled with aromatic smoke. Smell like sight shaped social perception. Hair styling itself was an art. Elaborate updo adorned with pins and combs reflected marital status and rank. In some periods, long flowing hair symbolized femininity and vitality. Cosmetics were not limited to women. Men in certain dynasties also used powder lightly, particularly within court circles where presentation reflected sophistication. Medical texts reveal that beauty and health were intertwined. Herbal formulas were created to brighten complexion, strengthen hair, and maintain youthful appearance. External beauty was believed to reflect internal balance. In China, cosmetics were less about dramatic transformation and more about symbolic harmony. Each brush stroke carried intention. Each color suggested refinement. Beauty was not rebellion. It was alignment with culture, with status, and with invisible balance believed to govern the universe itself. In ancient India, Cosmetics were never just about appearance. They were expressions of devotion, identity, and sacred symbolism woven directly into daily life. Long before commercial beauty products, Indian traditions incorporated natural ingredients drawn from plants, minerals, and spices. Turmeric was used to brighten skin and purify it. Sandalwood paste cooled the body in hot climates and left a soft fragrance. Henna stained hands and feet with intricate reddish patterns, especially during weddings and festivals. One of the most recognizable features was kajal, a dark eyeliner similar to kohl. Applied to both adults and children, kajal was believed to protect against the evil eye. A small dot placed on the cheek of a child could ward off jealousy or spiritual harm. Beauty and protection were inseparable. The forehead became a canvas of meaning. The bindi, traditionally a red, applied between the eyebrows, symbolized spiritual insight and marital status. In Hindu belief, this area marked the ajna chakra, the center of intuition. What may appear decorative today once carried layered spiritual significance. Hair held sacred importance. Long, well-maintained hair symbolized vitality and femininity. Oils made from coconut, sesame, or amla were massaged into the scalp to strengthen strands and promote shine. Fragrant flowers were often woven into braids during ceremonies. Ancient texts such as the Karma and Vedic writings described beauty routines in detail. These manuals included recipes for skin, cleansers made of lentils and herbs, tooth powders for oral care, and scented pastes for body application. Beauty was closely tied to health and balance within the body. Jewelry also functioned as cosmetic enhancement. Nose rings, anklets, and bangles were not merely ornaments. They signaled marital status, region, and social identity. Adornment formed a complete visual language. Class distinctions were visible in materials. Royal courts had access to rare perfumes and finely ground minerals. Rural communities relied on local herbs and plant-based dyes. Yet across social levels, the act of adornment was woven into ritual life. In India, cosmetics became a bridge between the physical and the spiritual. Applying kajal was protection. Wearing henna was blessing. Painting the forehead was alignment with divine energy. Beauty was not separate from belief. It was devotion made visible. Between the great empires of Egypt, Rome, and Persia lay a region where cosmetics took on a different emphasis. Scent. In the ancient Levant and Arabian Peninsula, fragrance was not simply pleasant. It was sacred currency. Trade routes crossing deserts and seas carried frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and exotic resins from Arabia into Mediterranean markets. These materials were worth extraordinary sums. To possess them was to hold status. Perfume was cosmetic and ritual at once. In temple ceremonies, incense smoke rose toward the heavens as offerings to deities. In private homes, scented oils were applied to skin and hair after bathing. The act of anointing symbolized purification, hospitality, and divine favor. A guest welcomed with fragrance was a guest honored. Both men and women used perfumed oils. Unlike some cultures where cosmetics were primarily associated with women, scent in the Levantine world was gender neutral. Warriors, merchants, and rulers alike valued fragrance as a marker of refinement. Eye cosmetics were also present. Kohl spread widely through trade networks. Applied around the eyes, it reduced glare from harsh sunlight and protected against infections. As in Egypt and India, it also carried spiritual symbolism believed to shield against harmful forces. Skincare routines relied heavily on oils. Olive oil was central, abundant, nourishing, and versatile. It softened skin, cleaned the body when mixed with scraping tools, and served as a base for infused perfumes. Hair grooming reflected status and identity. Carefully maintained beards in Assyrian and Persian societies were shaped and sometimes darkened with plant-based dyes. In some cases, false hairpieces were used to enhance fullness and symmetry. Class differences were clear. Rare resins and imported spices were reserved for elites. The scent of cinnamon or exotic myrrh drifting from garments announced wealth before a word was spoken. In desert climates, fragrance also masked sweat and heat. Practical need blended with ritual significance. Across the Levant and Arabia, cosmetics emphasized what could not be seen from afar, the invisible aura of scent. Beauty was carried in the air. To smell divine was to suggest closeness to the divine. In these regions, appearance extended beyond sight. It became atmosphere. As ancient societies grew more complex, cosmetics became something more than personal choice. They became regulation. Beauty began to signal not just taste, but hierarchy. In many civilizations, laws and social expectations governed who could wear what, how much, and when. Cosmetics were no longer only cultural expressions. They were controlled symbols of status. In ancient Rome, moralists openly criticized women who wore heavy makeup. Philosophers argued that excessive adornment disguised truth and corrupted virtue. Yet, elite women were expected to appear polished in public. The contradiction was sharp. Adorn yourself, but not too much. Be beautiful, but do not appear vain. In Greece, restraint was admired. In China, modesty aligned with Confucian values. In India, spiritual symbolism regulated where and how adornment was applied. Across cultures, beauty was powerful and therefore monitored. Class differences were especially visible. The wealthy accessed rare minerals, imported perfumes, and skilled attendants to prepare elaborate looks. Enslaved workers or servants often applied cosmetics daily for aristocratic households. Beauty labor intensive and hierarchical. A noble woman's smooth complexion depended on the invisible work of others. Meanwhile, the poor relied on local herbs, simple oils, and basic pigments. Their cosmetics were practical rather than luxurious. Yet, even modest adornment carried meaning. A carefully lined eye or scented oil could signal dignity in harsh conditions. Gender expectations also shaped cosmetic use. While many ancient cultures allowed men to wear certain cosmetics, especially eyeliner or fragrance, women were more closely scrutinized. Beauty intertwined with marriage prospects, fertility, and family honor. Cosmetics could even reflect political shifts. As empires expanded, imported ingredients became fashionable. Trade routes influenced trends. A pigment from one region might suddenly dominate elite courts elsewhere. Beauty followed power. What remains consistent across civilizations is this: cosmetics were never neutral. They communicated wealth, morality, devotion, and belonging. They could elevate social standing or invite criticism. They empowered individuals while reinforcing social order. Ancient cosmetics reveal something enduring about human societies. Beauty is admired, but it is also regulated. The painted face, the scented hair, the powdered skin, each became part of a broader system of class and control. And that system would echo through history long after empires fell. By the end of the ancient world, cosmetics had become deeply embedded in human culture. What began as mineral powders and scented oils had evolved into complex rituals that shaped identity across continents. Empires fell. Trade routes shifted. Religions transformed societies. Yet, the language of adornment endured. Ancient Egypt's kohl did not disappear. It traveled, adapted, and reappeared in different forms across the Mediterranean and the Middle East. The Roman fascination with skin creams and fragrance influenced medieval European beauty practices. Chinese powdered complexions inspired later dynastic trends. Indian kajal and henna traditions continued through centuries of cultural continuity. The ingredients changed, the meaning shifted, but the impulse remained the same. Across civilizations, cosmetics reflected deeper anxieties and desires. People sought protection from illness and spiritual harm. They sought signs of youth in aging bodies. They sought markers of status in competitive societies. They sought alignment with gods, traditions, and social expectations. Beauty was never trivial. It was communication. Ancient cosmetics also reveal something profoundly human. The body has always been a canvas of belief. A line of pigment around the eye could mean divine protection. A dab of perfume could signal hospitality. A pale face could indicate privilege. A red stain on the lips could suggest vitality. Even the risks, the toxic lead, powders, the harsh mineral dyes tell a story. People were willing to endure discomfort or danger for social acceptance, admiration, or spiritual reassurance. That tension between enhancement and harm is not new. It stretches back thousands of years. Modern beauty industries may feel advanced with laboratories and marketing campaigns replacing temple workshops and home remedies. Yet the foundations are ancient. We still moisturize dry skin. We still darken or highlight our eyes. We still use fragrance to shape first impressions. The tools have evolved. The motivations have not. Ancient cosmetics were not about shallow vanity. They were about belonging to a class, to a culture, to a faith. From kohl-lined eyes along the Nile to perfumed oils in Roman villas, beauty was a reflection of the world people lived in. And in many ways, it still is.